We have, I think we've started now. Yep, we have started.
Ah,
Jeff, great to see you again.
uh,
So nice. These conversations are so rewarding for me, and I also hear from people who watch our videos how much they are appreciated. So it's really nice to be tackling a momentous chapter in this book, also on a very special day in Christianity. It's Epiphany today, and I think both you and I touched on this when we first like talked about doing this book together. Is a certain epiphany happened for us on reading this. It gave us a completely new relationship to Christianity, Christ, Steiner. It's just this whole a new world makes itself available in a way that for me wasn't possible with like a more traditional Christian uh, pathway. And it really talks to the importance of developing new ideas, developing new concepts, so that looking at the same material, something that sort of like left you interested, takes you way beyond that. That's another topic we've talked about a lot when we did the series Truth and Science, and obviously the philosophy of freedom, the importance of being conceptual artists in a way, creating new ways of seeing the world, that new center for ourselves. As I was reading a bit about projective geometry earlier today, and it was talking about how, like, as human beings, so like when Copernicus came along and sort of like said, basically, obviously through observation, yeah, that the planet Earth isn't just like this unmoving object in space. It isn't that central point, and the challenge for human beings is to create that own central point, unmoving point within themselves. And that's what we do when we're creating concepts and finding how they create clarity in the world around us. Um, and one final thing before I let you to like give you a brief introduction. I also want to point out this chapter. They've all been like big chapters, but this one feels even more massive, and it becomes so obvious that we are only going to be able to scratch the surface of such an immense topic, of such immense importance in the hour or so that we'll be talking. And I'm reminded of how Steiner many times in his lecture series he will say something like that. I could talk for a month about this little topic, and if you're reading that, you're going, oh please, 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 tell me about it. Um, and that's obviously I can't talk for months and months about it like Steiner could, the Lazarus thing, but I am deeply aware, especially with this topic of Lazarus, how important it is, but how profound it is, that we're only going to be able to scratch the surface and hopefully encourage people to dig a little bit deeper for themselves into this um, amazing event that happened 2,000 years ago.
yeah, and that continues to happen today, and that is present because of the needs of the times at that time and at this time. Um, Evolutionarily speaking, I mean, the reason why this is so, for me, the reason why it's so crucial in this text and overall is that um, it has cosmological import.
Hmm.
It is the where the individual and the cosmological meet in a certain sense, the subject matter, um, which is why the Gospel of St. John starts off the way it does, uh, in order to um, direct our attention to that import. And so touching the surface is no small thing in and of itself, because if the logos is the beginning, then every iteration, every concept that is still living, that's in process, that's conceiving, is an iteration of that universal reality, universal process. And that is a cosmological and individual moment. So for an individual to articulate it in cosmological terms, well, it takes a whole life's work, and that's what Rudolf Steiner's work was about, if I could define it specifically. And went quite a ways in doing so. And there's much that we have to pick up. That's clear to me now in a new way, that with this work, there's present realities that these realities are applicable to, and he made indications as relates to scientific methodology, as artistic and religious and methodological, for extending his work. And I see our work in a humble and piecemeal kind of way as an extension of his work, and honoring it, not genuflecting in front of it as if it were some guru, but as an opportunity to, as I've said before, pick up that bed and walk. Yeah. So up till now, we've dealt with an historical moment that preceded this moment, and it's been really interesting to take note of the methods of the way in which people became sons of God, and yet this is a unique event where the Son of God is something different, and so we're making a huge transition here from a moment for a few individuals to a moment that necessarily is for the human race.
Should we launch into the texts that we've chosen to talk our way through this text? Okay, the first one was the one that you chose. So we'll follow our time-honored pattern of reading the other person's text, and then you can comment on why you chose it. So our first, this is right from the beginning of what is chapter 8 in the book. Okay. So he says, there is no doubt that among the miracles attributed to Jesus, very special importance must be attached to the raising of Lazarus at Bethany. Everything unites in assigning a prominent position in the New Testament to what the evangelist relates at this point. One must recall that it is related only by John, who claims a very definite interpretation for his gospel by the significant words with which it opens. John begins with the sentence, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt amongst us. And we beheld his glory, a glory of the only begotten Son of the Father, full of grace and truth." So if I tripped over that, there are bits missing because this is actually part of my meditative verse. Yeah, go on. Talk us through that, Jeff. What's happening here?
Oh, there's so much happening here. There's the fact that John is the only one that has related it, right? And I think we'll get into that, right? There's a reason why it's John, and it has to do with Lazarus, because John is Lazarus reborn, in a certain sense, resurrected, and not as the same person, and it couldn't possibly be the same person through that process. And we'll get into that because of who initiated him and the nature of personality associated with the evolution of the soul and what was needing to come at that time. And so the reason why I picked this one out is because of the cosmological import. In the beginning, right? This is like in the beginning of existence, and you could call that beginning the Big Bang. You can call it whatever you want to call it. The point is to discover what that origin is in a way that is relevant to now and is verifiable to now, in my opinion, because we're called to extend Rudolf Steiner's work into a marriage of sort of an alchemical wedding of that which is scientific and that which is religious. As you alluded to, partly through the artistic process of using living concepts as our medium, and and so those concepts are iterations of the word, capital W. They're iterations in continuity with the logos, and the logos has become flesh, and that means it's become flesh for you and me when we use concepts, right? And concepts aren't abstractions. They already exist in a certain sense. If everything is the word, everything is an iteration of the word. So so there's that part of it. Then there's the other part is this: in the beginning was the word, and the word was with God, and the word was a God, is also at the beginning of the Bible, generally speaking, as in Genesis, as the first sort of utterance. And then John feels his experience has allowed for understanding that word became flesh. And what really arose for me here is these are evolutionary processes we're talking about. And what was happening with the earth such that life needed an incarnation of that word into the flesh. So, and my understanding of this has to do with the way in which the earth is going through an evolutionary process of hardening, and that as iterations of that logos, we as human beings are sort of at the forefront of that hardening. And in a sense, we're at the greatest disadvantage, in a sense, you could say, that this is an anthropocentric point of view. It's actually, we're part of the continuity of this process. And this allows for freedom, and in fact, it demands freedom in a certain sense. But our bodies had become impenetrable by the spiritual soul totality of existence, by the word. And so we see before this, Heraclitus and Pherecydes and Pythagoras and Plato and Aristotle, I would argue, coming in touch through ritualistic processes with the word themselves. And they were experiencing something I would suggest that was terrifying, because not only were they having to get in touch with a word that likely human beings had a greater continuity with, but not only did they have to go through a ritualistic process, but they found that death was becoming a problem, right? That the Greeks talked about the problem of death as a terrifying thing, that there would rather be, beggars here than lords in the world of shades. And so this is an expression of humanity grappling with death in a way that is not that it transcends the modernist notion of death, that is not definable in terms of an end, that is only definable in terms of a process that gives birth to another process. And that's to keep it super general at this point, but because I'm saying an awful lot about what's going on here. But for me, that this just resonates with this cosmological import, and why it would become personified in a person. Yeah. Why personality would have to be the agency that would carry forward this evolutionary moment across a threshold. I think that's the best I can do for the moment.
That's a lot that you said there. I think there's some. This is from obviously the first 15 lines or 15 lines of John's Gospel there, and there's one sentence that hasn't been put in there, which I think talks very much to this cosmology, also like theory of where we all came from, idea of where we all came from, is where John says, and those who believed in his name were given the right to become children of God, or words to that effect. This idea that everyone is a child or a son of God. And this is really like reclaiming what when we can let that truth live within us, that's when we're beginning to reclaim our spiritual heritage, which has been lost because of the intellectual soul, because of this dividing that the intellect has to do to make sense of the world. But we've lost our center, and when John reminds us, hey guys, you all came from that word, and we can feel that as a reality. That's when it's like this inner certainty can begin to return to us. And I do find it interesting how when I speak to people who don't know much about Steiner but are very Christian in their outlook, this can be one of those parts in the Gospels where they'll really struggle. So you're saying sort of like a belief means I am a child of God or a spirit of God. They almost don't, when I talk to these people, there seems to be a rejection of that, and that's surprising to me, because this is this is where it becomes sort of like I begin to understand the source of my being, or experience. Understand is perhaps going too far. It's definitely going too far. But I begin to experience like this intuition of, it's like this infinite ground upon which, out of which I have been born, and out of which we are all born. So the cosmology angle that you were talking about here, I think, is an essential part, and it's one of the many reasons, I'm sure, that Steiner says that particularly the first 15 or 18, there are different variations on it, verses of John are exceedingly fertile ground for meditations, and he talks about the transformative effects that repeated work with this part of the Bible can have on the soul when it's repeated month after month, year after year. It's like permeated with the feeling life. One other thing that you said also got me thinking, which was an interesting reflection that the Greeks grappling with death. It's again, one of the problems with our age is that we assume that everybody's always worried about this, but this was actually like a new event, a relatively new event for peoples like 2,500 years ago. To a certain extent, humanity's consciousness, the further we go back in time, the more it becomes similar, not the same as, but similar in certain respects with regards to death as an animal. An animal doesn't know about death, and human beings for a long time didn't know what death was. It was something that gradually dawned on them, and it's the same for us. Like when we pop out of the womb, we don't know about death. It's sort of like it might be when we're 2, 3, 4, or even older, before this concept of not living is even possible for us. And these are also important aspects to bring into this environment, because as you said, so like people are trying to understand death, which wasn't a problem before, because even though it existed, it didn't exist because they didn't know about it. But it was becoming a serious problem, and the suffering, and um, these this miracle that it's called here, or sign, it could also be called, that occurred in Bethany. This raising of the dead. This isn't the only instance of the raising of the dead that happens, even in John. Oh, sorry, even in the Gospel. So I have to be careful there, because I think it's in Luke that the other two are very clearly, or in the Synoptic Gospels that the other ones are. But so this idea of people being called back from the realm of the dead exists both in the New Testament before Lazarus, and there are several examples of it also in the Old Testament. It's so these aren't completely foreign concepts. It's more a large aspect of why this event is so important is the way in which it and the way in which it occurs. And I think that's what we're going to be digging into deeper as we look at some more of the text.
I'm glad that you dwelt in the concept of death there some, because and the other part of this is birth, right? The other side of that. And I'm not gonna say I'm gonna push back, but I'm gonna give a permutation as relates to how people experienced death before what we understand as just before the time of Christ, say. But before that, before the religious experience needed to be written down because it was being forgotten, say. And I imagine, and I'm not making a claim here, I'm just working with imagination, that the actual experience of people were that they experienced death, but it was a permeable membrane, and there was continuity of memory through it. There's continuity of something. Now, there wasn't necessarily as individuated as we are, and so that it speaks to the mystery of what it is now to have an initiatory process, that we don't have to go through death rituals now, which I think perhaps we'll touch upon later. But I also want to focus on this the only begotten Son of the Father. That is like what we've been talking about. We seem to be contradicting ourselves if we're saying that everybody is a son of God, and in fact that initiates were a son of God, and that was a code language for coming in touch with the Logos. But that was before the Logos became flesh, right? That was an experience of the Logos in its totality, say, and iterated through an individual experience, which is mind-blowing, I'm quite sure. Just like hallucinatory drugs are mind-blowing in exactly the same way. But now we have a personality who's in the flesh, who's been begotten by the Father. What does that mean? Right? And this is somewhat of an open question, but I've been meditating on that. That the word begotten is to father something, a child, right? So to be a child of the Father as the totality, intentionally distilling something of itself into the flesh, as opposed to you and I struggling along with this process and trying to gain enlightenment, as the initiates did through their rituals, and found that word at another side of some sort of threshold. Now this is not on the other side of another threshold, and this is the importance of John being confronted with this after turning from Lazarus to John when walking out of the grave and seeing and going, oh, that's what I just experienced, right?
Yeah.
Something like that. And I think we'll get into that too, but I that's part of the why I picked this rich wealth of a of a start to this chapter, but also this to beginning of the Gospel of John.
Yeah. It's funny. You said I'm going to give a bit of pushback, but I didn't hit anything but confirmation.
Well, you were
I was
saying
thinking, hold on, hold on. Where were you disagreeing with me? No, no, no. We're the same.
one could interpret, I guess, uh, that people didn't experience death, right?
Mm.
Um, and I also can understand why the idea of belief is an anathema to people. So because I have that, that's why I'm an epistemologist, in my heart. And that's why I was at 10 years old. That's the way I was thinking about things,
Yeah.
because I always walk that line between the two, like it has to be real. It has to be. Can't be a belief, right? But we're talking about belief in a different sense, and so you and I complement each other in this respect, and I think we do in relationship similarly, in the notion of how people experienced death, because you made the delineation that it's not just like animals, right? Obviously, animals experience death to some extent. That some good there's some good evidence from primate research that there's mourning that happens. Dogs do something similar, but it's associated with it. It's not the same experience of the permeability of the threshold of death, and B, um, the the apparent obstacle that it became. It's nowhere is it an obstacle
Yeah.
for I would suggest other forms of life. Um, so
And
I was
there's
trying to
another
make that
area.
distinction.
Yeah. There's another area in which um, it, but I think that the area of memory is also very interesting to look at from that perspective, because obviously the further you go back in time, so like there was they still had contact with the dead. So like all this ancestral the importance of ancestry, it was a direct recognition that there was still contact was still possible beyond the threshold. So death didn't exist for them in that way either. It was a different understanding of death to which we have today. I know. I also remember when I read about this idea of how, for example, the name Abraham or Zoroaster, or it could be like or Dionysus even, and these names, especially if you go back in the Old Testament, that the further you go back in time, the more you're actually referring to a bloodline when it seems to be a name, which it's like it allows us to make sense of how um, some of the patriarchs were able to live for like multiple hundreds of years, which seems crazy from a modern day perspective, but it was they didn't experience themselves as individuals like we do nowadays. They experience themselves through the bloodline and how long that bloodline consisted, and that's where memory lay. Um, yeah. So yeah, it's a rich it's a rich seam to mine, that whole question of what is death and how have our perspectives on it changed throughout the ages, because it's not this static idea, which is understandable that people have if they haven't like looked more deeply into the question.
Yeah, it's the limit to knowledge, say, or
Yeah.
and yeah, and so we don't also have a realization of what death is, and so we fetishize it as our health industrial complex to avoid it at all costs. If that's not an indication of a barrier that is that that at least plausibly is potentially permeable. And by the way, there are people who are very powerful who understand this and are manipulating people because they understand this. Uh, there is permeability and there is manipulation possible associated with that permeability. And the more that you can get people to disc to make absolute disconnect between the spiritual and the life realm as we know it, the more you can get people to be vulnerable when they pass across that threshold through that membrane, That's something that has to be remembered. I believe, because that's super pertinent to this day and age, and the reason why we need to be doing this work seriously, not just for our own gratification.
Yeah. Okay, should we move on to the next slide? This
Oh,
is
I don't want to. I want to stay with this one. Just kidding.
we're still gonna be talking about the same.
I know. I know. I'm teasing.
Okay.
All right, my turn.
Yes.
I'm getting over a cold, so pardon me if I have to clear my throat a couple times. Let me just take a little refreshing drink of Mountain Valley spring water. Our fake sponsor.
Yeah, that's right.
There can be no doubt that the event at Bethany was an awakening in a spiritual sense. Lazarus became a different person. He was raised to a life of which the eternal word proclaims, I am this life. What then took place in Lazarus? The Spirit came to life within him. He partook of all the life which is eternal. We need only express his experience of resurrection in the words of those who were initiated into the mysteries, and at once the meaning becomes clear. What does Plutarch say about the purpose of the mysteries? They were designed to enable the soul to withdraw from bodily life and unite with the gods. Schelling describes the feelings of an initiate thus. The initiate, through the rites which he received, became a link in the magic chain. He himself became a kaberi. Is that right? Is that how you pronounce that?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. He was received into the indestructible relationship, joining the army of the higher gods, as ancient inscriptions express it. And the change that took place in the life of a person who had received the rites of the mysteries cannot be more significantly described than in the words spoken by Odysseus to his disciple, the Emperor Constantine. If one day you should partake in the mysteries, you will feel ashamed of having been born only as a man. Interesting.
Yeah, there's so much going on here. Where shall I start? Lazarus became a different person. In another part of this chapter, Steiner creates this picture. Or he uses the analogy. He might be taking it from Schelling actually, but I can't remember, or from another thinker. But he says something along the lines of a woman becomes ill when she becomes pregnant, and new life is born. And relating it to this process is this beautiful image of how it's like we are in illness in our body until we fully experience that we are a part of the divine, and that this initiation process that in the mysteries that was always held secret, it was reserved for a few elect people who like went through a specific schooling, often for decades, before they could actually give birth to their higher self that was within them all. And this is also such a potent image that we also see as something that happens multiple times, both in the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, it's especially clear when we've talked about it when we've in previous episodes on the mysteries, or on Christianity as mystical fact. These prophets, that they have these experiences which clearly connect them when they become spiritually reborn, and they are able to, how could we express it, able to leave behind themselves as like a part of their being that no longer has any value for them. It's like that the old old habits, old ways of seeing the world, old ways of acting are shed from their being as they receive this light from above that fills their life with a meaning and a purpose which goes way beyond what was possible for them to imagine before. So it really is. It's a transformation. It's not just somebody coming back from the dead and bits remaining the same person. This is one of the points that he's drills home here, is that it's essential, just like we see with Paul. It's like on his journey to Damascus, which was the first experience of the Christ which wasn't directly related to Jesus Christ. It's like the actual, it's like the being that lived prior to the resurrection. This was a purely super sensible experience that Paul had, but here we have Christ being directly involved in somebody waking up to their higher selves, or to, let's put it more starkly and accurately, to their infinite selves. The more they relate to that direct connection that they have, that direct experience of, they were also created by the Logos, because the Logos in the beginning was the Word, and all things were made through it. Nothing that was made except through it. And that, by extension, means, if we take this to be it's like an axiomatic statement about the whole of life, that everything around us, ourselves included, are a manifestation of that word. And this is what this is where Christ has led him to this experience, so that he can wake up to his true essential nature.
Yeah, which is the Christ nature, which is the resurrection. Right? And so, gosh, there's so much there, Ingus. You could say, from the point of view of, say, the human development movement or developmental psychology, that this is a metaphor for waking up at different levels, right? And that this happens all the time through developmental processes. It happens in children through sort of Zach Stein like skill development, say Piagetian skill development, elaborated by Zach, and that human beings can take that process up, at a certain point where there's a certain level of neurological autonomy or something like that. And that's all true. It's all factual. There's no question about it. But the importance of the cosmological import of in the beginning was the Word, and the Word became flesh, is that not only are we manifestations of that Word, we're processes that are reiterating that Word, that are holographically, microcosmically reiterating that Word. And it's only through that individuation process, the process of deep personal plumbing of the depths, that the smaller miniature iterations can become more and more incarnated into a continuity that is not just fragmented versions of ourselves or fragmented identities, which are necessary steps in a process, but we are imbued by. So we've got these big, moments like Paul on the road to Damascus, right? And we have a different person that comes out the other side because it was a revelation, right? But these are also small steps in a process that are an initiatory process without the need to go through actual death in order to experience it.
Yeah.
But the death experience is the indication of what's possible now in process constantly, and that it does not preclude the symbolical reality, which is refers to later, which we'll get to, that this isn't just a metaphor; it's beyond metaphor, and it can be used metaphorically. But you can also get lost in metaphors, like you can get lost in theories and models and these sorts of things, and then take the map for the territory, right? And so, important for me to stay in touch with the incredible spiritual reality that is that is alive in this, and that we are part of the cosmos,
Yeah.
and we can understand it relationally, right? So there's all the iterations, which you could call living concepts, in the of the logos, and then there's the relational reality that exists between them, and and um, and that in itself is the logos in process, iterating itself in these the iterative process, if you will. I'm kind of stuck on that word. I don't know why, but
I really liked it. You brought it back to death again, and it's so good that you did, because one of the things that you helped like flesh out this transformation. It doesn't have to this incarnation of Christ in us doesn't is it it isn't just about like life and deaths like as in the story of Lazarus. If you look at like through history, I was just thinking about Augustine. It's like he has to have a death to his old life before he can take on like this new truth. Or Francis of Assisi has also like born into sort of this rich life, and he led a somewhat debaucherous life until this inner transformation happened when he was where he met the Christ within himself and has to leave his old life behind. And of course, Paul, who we've already mentioned here, that these are we could perhaps call them micro deaths or mini deaths that are all part of this cumulative process. And the link with Lazarus is that this is all happening out in the open. These aren't processes of reascending or reclaiming one's spiritual like birthright as like spiritual origins through being part of a select school. This is an understanding of how this being is continually changing people the whole time. These micro deaths of leaving ourselves behind are an essential aspect of any nature that strives to better him or herself. And I think this leads us somewhat to the last bit of this text, where he says, "If one day you should partake in the mysteries, you will feel ashamed of having been born only as a man." And I think one of the reasons this talks so loudly to me is this picture that we have like descended so far, and how it was even possible that we forgot. I'm thinking of William Wordsworth. It's like we come from God with the trailing. What's the I can't think.
trailing clouds of glory.
Trailing clouds of glory. This image. How can we forget such a blessed state of being? How can we fall so low that is sort of like we treat that as fiction? And yeah, and it's this crushing, or it can be this crushing experience, especially if you're not prepared. And that's where these micro deaths, this slow awakening, make this almost unbearable burden bearable, because we slowly wake up to the truth of what it is, or how monumentally we have actually deceived ourselves about our own essence. There's so much going on there.
I'm so glad you amplified that last sentence. I loved it, but I didn't know why I loved it quite, and now I do. This this speaks to the two sides of that the Greeks were having, right? Because they were experiencing the logos, and were experiencing then the fact that they're because they were experiencing the logos in these extraordinary ways, that they had that they were experiencing the other side of that they weren't experiencing the logos. So they were there was a forgetting that they were torturously aware of, to some extent, say. And nowadays I think we see this in a lot of my friends over my biography talked about this, that there's a feeling, let's say, that you're a sham, or that you're a fraud, or maybe you have a feeling of that you're meant for greatness on the other side of that, or on the other side of that you're terrified of what you're capable of. And these are micro awarenesses of this duality that we are constantly experiencing, maybe the foundational duality of what it is to be a human being in at least modern times, and in even pre-modern times. The idea of the stain, for example, the eternal stain, and that the church so generously offered us in their attempts to control individuals. Yeah, right. Or in the religion of scientism, the idea that we are just specks of unrelated matter floating around in an infinite universe, which is a kind of relationship to the cosmos in a way. It's a kind of an admitted smuggling in of the terrible responsibility of making the connection again. So I'm so glad you amplified that. It says so much that's so pertinent about our times, and about what the antidote to those the times are and is. It's living within each one of us, and is available.
Okay, move to yeah. We chose we finished with a long passage here. So like where I started, you finished off. We had a connecting there. So there should be like just one long piece here. But you can read the first bit there, because we'll divide it up.
I see. This is the first bit, and then
that's right.
What I added followed. Okay.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
I see. That happened last time too. All right. In Lazarus, Jesus accomplished the great miracle of the transformation of life in the sense of ancient traditions. Through this event, Christianity is linked with the mysteries. Very important. Lazarus had become an initiate through Christ Jesus himself. Thereby, Lazarus had become able to rise into the higher worlds. He was at the same time both the first Christian initiate and the first to be initiated by Christ Jesus himself. Through his initiation, he became capable of perceiving that the Word, which had come to life within him, had become a person in Christ Jesus. And thus there stood before him, in the personality of his awakener, the same which had been revealed within him spiritually. From this point of view, the following words of Jesus are significant. And I knew that thou hearest me always, but because of the people which stand by, I said it, that they may believe that thou hast sent me. John 11:42. That is to say, it is a question of revealing that in Jesus, the Son of the Father lives in such a way that when he awakens his own being in man, man becomes a mystic. In this way, Jesus made it plain that the meaning of life lay hidden in the mysteries, and that they paved the way to this meaning.
There we have it. The answer to what is the meaning of life. It's a facile way of summing up. There's a lot of things going on there, but let's just focus on that particular question, or that particular aspect. What is being said here, or my understanding of what is being said here, is these ancient initiation centers, these mystery centers, there were people that were so intensely concerned and interested in really taking this question seriously. What is the meaning of my life? What is the meaning of life? And they were prepared to train themselves for decades to obtain this spiritual revelation, which was um, which was not available to people who didn't participate in the mysteries, who weren't elected to become part of these schools. It was, uh, let's use a trendy word, it was elitist in a way. Um, I mean, they will have had their own ways of selecting uh, which novices would become initiates, and they would like have their own ways of like testing their abilities. And you see this, you see this over. For me, this is especially clear in Eastern mysticism. This idea of the gurus like choosing his pupils, and that they really had to prove themselves as competent beings there. Um, but with Christ, we've entered, or with the coming of the Word, with the Word becoming flesh, the whole trajectory of human history changed, because it was no longer this finding a, a genuine answer for each individual self as to what is the meaning of my life became possible for each and every human being if that individual was able to like connect itself with the Christ impulse. And it wasn't so much that it needed to be called Christ, but it's like this searching for the truth, this recognition that there is a higher being, there is this what in John is called the Word, that this original creator of all life, of everything, is something to which I belong, something which lives in me, and the more I let it live in me, it's like my own true nature um, reveals itself. And this making public of the mysteries is one of the reasons this story is so important. And Steiner also delineates here how he talks about what was the name of the person he talked about, but it was some theologian who's like trying to like make sense of this Lazarus story. And he said, Steiner says that he did hit upon something very important here. This guy, he can't explain what's going on, but he did identify that this is the time when the Pharisee said, we got to kill him, we got to kill him. And you see it there. It's like in about, I think it's in about 45 somewhere, where Caiaphas is actually says, we have to kill this person who is making the mysteries public, otherwise everybody will start to believe in him. And Steiner says that this intuition that this theologian had, that this is where the real enmity against Christ became a flood that couldn't be held back, because they saw it as a threat to their own. I was trying to think of the word that was actually used in John there. Do they call it? I think they call it their power. But it's like this man is a threat to our power and to our nation. Let's see if I can just actually find that, because I put it at the end of my notes. I'll have a look whilst you're talking with him.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I can't find it immediately in my notes there. So that was one of many thoughts that that I had there. Go on, you launch in there, say something there, Jeff.
Oh man. Um. So, part of what's in this is that the Christ Jesus as a personality was a teacher of John, of Lazarus, right? Preparing him, preparing him in to deal with the actual terrible nature of what it is to incarnate into as a spiritually aware being into a physical body. Like you have to go through the entombment,
Mhm.
right? As Plato called the body, the physical body, the tomb for the soul. And this is another indication of where evolution was happening. That is actually true. That's true for us today, where our souls are independent of the spiritual world, and we can remain independent, right? And we become um, um, by denying the spirit, right? And then we also remain somewhat independent, and then we never become embodied in in the sense that this is what's being called for in our time, in order for us to not be finally defeated by uh, a what's symptomatically in our culture is a death wish, a kind of self-sabotage, a sort of self-destruction, a sort of extinction event, right? When we've talked about this before, like this is this is foretold, or this is why these events occurred, so this would be available. So I want to also illustrate that there's a before and after here. There is the resurrection of Lazarus into John, and this is before Christ went through his own resurrection process. So only John could have written this, because he wakes up, sees the Christ, and went, "Oh, hey, that's the Logos, except
Yeah.
it's right here in contemporary life." Uh, um, right, and that's the first time historically that the Logos wasn't a secret initiatory experience. So it wasn't like a choice. It's like, oh, we got to keep this secret because the people will, go nuts if they come in touch with it. It was a necessity, evolutionary necessity, that the individuation process it, is married to the spiritually incarnating process. And so for Christ just to have a resurrection without resurrecting somebody else first, right? We have to remember that this is Christ in Jesus at this point. It's not Jesus the genius,
Mhm.
the the inherent initiate who's basically born an initiate, who wows people at 12 years old. This is the incarnated Christ after the baptism, the water ritual, right? So this is the Jesus personality is is has exited the scene, and it's the eye of the Christ, that the eternal eye, the eternal Logos, that's living in the body of this Jesus. And so John doesn't recognize that. Lazarus doesn't recognize that until the transmutation of his physical body. So that's why it's both symbolical and real.
And
So that's why we use the term symbolical. My translation that I was reading said pictorial, and I think that is that's a terrible translation, because I've argued for this word symbol to be both representative and the thing itself. It is the Logos. It is an iteration of the Logos, as much as concepts remain alive and not claims or theories or models or that sort of thing, and as much as we are conceiving, we are in this process. But then we have uh, this gospel written knowingly, because not only did John experience it as an initiate, but as an initiate that recognized the contemporary living being. So then we have the after, which we touched upon importantly, I think, with Mary Magdalene. And we have the after, which is the Christ is alive again,
Mm.
right? So the Christ lives in the formative forces of the earth, has married himself with the karma of the earth, the whole earth, in relationship to the cosmos. So it's no longer merely a cosmological, a cosmogonic
something that's
being.
out there. Yeah.
Yes, the earth, in a sense, is in relationship to the cosmos. Uh, um, we've talked also about the blood that dripped as a homeopathizing of the earth's um, of the Earth's aura, say. And so you have then the Christ meeting us. No, we no longer need to go through the death ritual because he's in our life bodies,
Yeah.
right? That the Logos lives within our life bodies, and so that's why we can be so sure. That's why the just understanding that gives you a kind of an epistemological understanding of that gives you a surety, not a certainty again, that is unassailable, say, and you come into touch with your ineffable nature, which is very. It's not an egotistical thing, I can tell you. You feel very humbled by that when you come in touch with it, and then when you get out of touch with it, you're like the end of the previous one. You're the one that wishes she was the man that he was meant to be, rather than the one that walks around like a doofus all day long.
You've said so many things, Jeff. I'm gonna mention three things like far too briefly, and then like hone in on the last thing that you're saying, which is deeply fascinating about the homeopathic dose of blood. Um, first of all, I thought I was going to talk about John and my confusions. Like when I was young, thinking they are different. They are the same person, but they are actually different when you like read it properly, and then through Stein you discover that they are the same. Could have talked about that for one. Could have also talked about like the importance that Steiner, he goes this whole question, is he dead or is he alive? He's sleeping. No. Oh well, if he's sleeping, just let him wake up. No, but he's dead. And this at the beginning of the chapter, there's so much to look at there that's of value, but I can't go there either. And then the whole what you're talking about with symbology, I mean, this is the whole essence of this title for me. It's a mystical fact. It's both. But no, I'm not going to go there either, because you said something even more interesting, which was if you look at GA7 and the mystery centers, and I believe this is something I touched on the time before last, but I can't remember. In the mystery centers, I believe it's in the Hibernian mystery centers, that they were they had this like particular fascination with the metals, and this study of the metals and what they really were for humanity. And people might realize that's like copper is associated with Venus, tin with Jupiter, Mars, iron, sun, gold, moon, silver, and Saturn, lead. And what is interesting about all of these metals, with the exception of iron, is that our bodies do not tolerate them. And this was like this great mystery, or one of the questions they were trying to get answers to in the mystery center. So what is it? It's like, why can't we absorb lead into our bodies? And this image that is created is that it is because of homeopathic doses of lead throughout the solar system. They are the basis. Without that, we would have no memory. We would not be able to like recall everything. We would live in a continual flow. We would live in the, what's it called, the infinite scroll of life. We would like never look back. It was like it would just pass in front of our eyes, and we would never know about it again. But it's these homeopathic doses of lead that exist within the cosmos, that give us this ability to have memory. And what you were describing, or the picture that came across so strongly is, and when these homeopathic drops of blood came about on Earth, when they penetrated the Earth, this is when the Earth itself, it received this new impulse that would make a completely new faculty available to mankind, something that it was impossible to have before. In the same way that a solar system without lead automatically, according to ancient mystery thinking, meant a solar system without memory, so also humanity's evolution, or this new faculty that's this new faculty of individual spiritual awakening on the physical plane is now something that is possible purely because of the homeopathic doses of blood that permeated the earth 2000 years ago. And that really is for myself, that's a powerful picture that speaks realms or speaks reams to the significance of what it was that happened.
In my imagination, this is really important. Like, first, that's a trite way to say it. This is crucially important now, and this is just dawning on me, so bear with me for a second, that moment, you could say, was a preparation of the body of the earth for a resurrection of a being that was everywhere at once, right? And yet it iterated in every single life form.
Yeah.
Not just humans, or not just individuals, but particularly individuals, in that we are in a sense speciating ourselves as individuals, and particularly in living concepts. And so the whole idea of cognition, oh my God, I mean, that's what he says at the end here, isn't it?
Yeah.
Shoot. Yeah. Okay. I almost said the other word. Yeah. Boy, that really dawns on me based on what you were saying and our whole conversation here, that there is a proof of concept of homeopathics, for one thing. Is I think we found in interdisciplinary astronomy as well. But life as pre-physical, physical, and then post-physical, in a certain sense, right? Or pre-matter, matter, and post-matter, something like that. Like that's the biography of what it is to be a human being, and it's the biography of the cosmos through the hardening of the earth as a whole, something like that.
Yeah, and I think we can use yet another image right from the beginning of John. In the beginning was the word, the light shone into the darkness, but the darkness did not know it or did not recognize it until, like, the light was, it's like there was a man sent by God whose name was John, so that he might bear witness to that light, and then those people that were able to recognize that light, they were the people. And it should have, if this was the Jewish mission, those would be able to recognize that they were born of that light. So we've got this circularity going on in the beginning of John, where quite the light that created the light that was made by the word, that was created by the word, that was the source of everything. Everything was ignorant of its own divine logos-like origin until Christ came along, and this is the capacity that was born as those homeopathic drops seeped into the earth. There, this slow recognition that bit by bit we can rediscover that we are these light beings born of the logos, born of the word.
Beautifully said.
Right, so my turn to read. This is a continuation. This is the bit of the text that you chose, and I'll read it. He is the living word. In him was personified what had become ancient tradition, and the evangelist is justified in expressing this in the sentence, in him the word became flesh. He rightly sees in Jesus himself an incarnated mystery, and because of this, John's Gospel is a mystery. In order to read it rightly, we must bear in mind that the facts are spiritual facts. If a priest of an ancient order had written it, he would have described traditional rites. For John, these rites took the form of a person. They became the life of Jesus. Burckhardt, an eminent modern investigator of the mysteries, indeed cite Constantine's, the time of Constantine, says that they are matters about which we shall never be clear, but this is simply because he has not perceived the way to this clarity. If we examine the Gospel of John and behold in the sphere of pictorially physical reality the drama of cognition enacted by the ancients, we are looking upon the mystery itself. In the words Lazarus come forth, we can recognize the call by which the Egyptian priest initiators summoned back to everyday life those who had subjected themselves to the process of initiation, which withdrew them from the world that they might die to earthly things and gain a conviction of the reality of the eternal.
Yeah. So this helps me connect even more this idea of personification or a personality as the necessary individuating process that is the Word became flesh, which then becomes, we're all mystery centers, and right, and we don't need, although they're helpful, I would say, from a psychological standpoint, an orientating standpoint, we don't need, as the initiates previous needed the mythologies to do soul hygiene, right? That's what the mythologies were for. The mythos was for preparing the initiate to come to the threshold without being blown apart by like the three of the four rabbis, right? And so developing a personality, an individuality, as a free, autonomous spiritual being incarnating into an embodied mystery is the recapitulation of not only the recapitulation, but it is the coming in touch of that which is alive in you, that is the Christ, right? That would be, if you just walked up to it, right, it would blow you apart, because it's the totality of existence, that it's your totality of existence living as a personality within you, and that's a slow process to engage with. And he talks about this is a bit of an aside, but it's super relatable, I think. He talks about in Riddles of Humanity of the danger of accessing the life processes, the 7 life processes, directly, and that the way to do that is through art. The way to do it is through creating, is through the creative process within the soul, so that the life processes become ensouled themselves, so that you're preparing them as a vehicle, right? But also overcoming the way in which we've medicalized our physiological, the relationship with our physiology and our life processes, so that they're twisted up, that these life processes were possessed at the level of our life processes. And in order to free that, in order to be curative, in order for us to pick our bed up and walk, then we have to be for me, that means we have to be artists in concepts. That means we have to work through an epistemological process to come into touch with this being that is inherent to us, so that when we get there, we have a self to understand it, right? So a soul that is a vessel for coming into intimate contact with that which is universal, and we get to touch upon it here and there and here and there, and increasingly, and yet that builds the faith that he talks about, right? That it's because it's happened, because there was an eyewitness to it who experienced it themselves and then reported on the experience of themselves recognizing it, as opposed to the other disciples who witnessed the aftermath of the resurrection. It wouldn't have the same it wouldn't, perhaps Christ would be there, but there would be no conscious way to understand that there's actually a process through ensoulment into the physiological formative forces that we call life forces that make it available.
Yeah.
The experience process.
I want to riff a little bit off of your artists in concepts idea, because I think it's so important. And I'm going to do it in like two micro stages. But so in this text, it's like he emphasizes, it's like this Lazarus come forth, and we can recognize the call of the Egyptian priest. And once we have educated our conceptual life into the idea that this is a mystery tradition, if we don't have this, then these words are sort of like, oh yeah, he's just saying, so like, come out, and nothing like, perhaps nothing special. We won't attach significance to it, and we won't attach, and the problem with, is he alive or is he sleeping, we can't make sense of that. It's just like, it's a curious passage that sort of like exists in this chapter. But once we have the conceptual, it's like the concepts that we can learn about within spiritual science, then suddenly this chapter of the Bible becomes so much more full of details, so much more full of sense. And I want to give an example of that. Actually, in fact, we've had as the background picture this whole time throughout our whole series, we've had this as our background picture, which is a picture of Lazarus, of course. And one of the things that's if you look a little bit into, it's like the art history of how Lazarus is depicted, very often, and the further you go back in tradition, it's exactly this idea. Lazarus is standing up and he's bound, so like somewhat like almost mummy-like looking in this. And again, this must be very strange. And why is there like this clarity in ancient art, or it's like medieval to ancient art, about what was really going on here? And Christ's like saying, "Come forth," and there was, when these images were created, the artists, they still knew about these ancient mystery traditions, and therefore they created their art in conformity with what they knew to be an expression of a um, of a mystery initiations, like happening on a different level, out in the open, not in the closed caverns. And so this is how they would depict it then, that a person standing up, it's like somebody being initiated into life. And all of these, so I said that I wanted to like come back to this artist in concepts. The more we educate ourselves into, it's like, what was the conceptual life back then? How was it? Don't so forget for a moment, it's like all our modern scientific understanding of the world, but what was life really like then? And I don't mean the phony, fake scientific evidence about, or no, it's not phony, it's not fake. What I mean is it's like all the assumptions that are made about life back then because of how we think now, and assuming that what's true now must have been true back then. Once we begin to like escape from that gravitational sphere and begin to inform ourselves about like what life was really like there, how people experienced it, what were the traditions, for example, these mystery traditions, then John's gospel, and especially Lazarus, comes through with a new level of clarity and a new level of meaning, and a new level of believability, that for a mind just initiated into modern material thinking can only treat as ridiculous. But that is the problem, that they don't realize they've only been initiated into it like a modern conceptual world of the view, rather than understanding they need to become artists in concepts and create a whole new field of concepts that allow them to truly penetrate the Bible and experience the wisdom, and the profound historical event that happened, like on Golgotha 2,000 years ago.
I think of Raphael here. I think of the way in which artists that had some understanding, some say, like a music, like Beethoven has musical theory, right? And then creates, doesn't think about the musical theory, has it. Picasso, they've developed a historical understanding about their craft, and then they let her rip, right? And so they're also saying things, they're depicting things that are alive today, not just historically recapturable. Maybe the subject matter is something they intuitively know will be a good vehicle for saying something of the experience of the logos, say. And I think the deconstructionists, the postmodernists, have done us a bit of a favor, because they've disassociated the historical, or they speak disassociatively with the historical, as if they weren't, part intimately wrapped up in the evolution of humanity, because they don't want a grand narrative, right? But art is no longer something that is done by professionals, right? It's something we all do constantly. We're part of the process, in that our concepts for these people, for the Heraclituses of the world, concepts were alive, as they are for us, but we have belief, we have cognitive theories that abstract concepts into merely intellectual frameworks that are dead. They're no longer concepts at all, because they're not in the process of dialogic conceiving with each other. But that's what we're doing here. And so letting her rip, like painting or literature or music, they're all iterations of this logos experience that you can tap into if you allow for the creative process to be the guiding principle, because it's rooted in the logos. It's rooted in what you express when you're participating in the creative process. And that includes, as we've seen with riddles of philosophy and in our studies in epistemology, a sure path of creating theories that are transparent to oneself, to not separate the self in concept. Because if you if you say that you just have a concept of yourself, of your personality, you've killed the concept, and you've left the self with no cognitive mooring. But if you recognize that the concept of the self itself is an iteration of the logos, and you're part of the transformation of that self through this ensoulment process, then you are unifying. You're creating the bridge across which which we've abstracted, because we think in terms of what you were saying, that these people thought the way we did. But it's available in a present way, and you can see now, like, what the Akashic record might be. If everything is logos, in a process of iteration of that logos, the reading of nature itself would be a Goethean endeavor that just gives you the so-called archetypes, or the symbolic nature of the representative being the being itself.
Thank you, Jeff. A wonderful
Angus.
Conversation, as
Lovely.
always. I'm going to do the time-honoured button pressing.